You may not like what you find.
And he had a deadly secret from the depths of hell.
This place is giving me the creeps.
I am telling you, Hunley, it was only a show.
Thank you, Reverend. Good night.
Farewell, Mr. Jones. Farewell.
What was that?
Simply the cry of a jungle bird, my dear.
I knew something terrible was going to happen.
Nothing terrible has happened.
Ever since they started playing around with those dead bodies.
This is frightful.
Why doesn't everybody just relax? It's supposed to be a fun picnic, remember?
Yeah, this place is getting creepy about a minute.
Wait a minute. There's always the house.
What house?
That villa a couple miles down the road.
Didn't see any villa.
That's because you don't have my fine painter's eye.
It's on the mountain. Hey, maybe they have a phone.
It looks like a bird or a bear.
Look, it doesn't matter who right now. All I know is homicidal. You read me? He's trying to kill me. Got it?
They're both dead. Murdered.
Oh, my God. First Helen and Jerry, and now George and Ethel.
Somebody out there wants us all dead.
Is it the voodoo people who took him away?
Oh, I really don't know.
You know, a bunch of us came up from the port for the voodoo mass. And ever since then, it's been nothing but trouble.
Are these murderers, these monsters, are they cannibals?
Hey, this is Russ Manzat, the writer of Rush Week, and you're listening to The Hysteria Continues.
And indeed you are. Welcome back to The Hysteria Continues. This is episode 264, and this time we're heading to Zombie Island for a massacre. And of course, the question is, you may be asking yourself, if you're not familiar with this movie, is why are we covering a zombie movie? Well, we're not covering a zombie movie. We're covering a zombie movie masquerading, no, a slasher movie masquerading as a zombie movie, which we'll get into. But this is 100% pure early 80s cheesy slasher. So so it's one I reviewed quite recently for Hysteria Lives, and actually arguably the backstory to the film is much more interesting than the film itself, although it has its own charms perhaps, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But first up, how are we all doing? Erik, are you got a big heat wave coming tomorrow?
Apparently we do, yeah, but big heat wave in Ireland is like 30 Celsius, so it's nothing to get too excited about.
I think in where my parents live, it's going to be 37 tomorrow.
Yeah, or 40, I heard, around London.
So hopefully they keep cool. But and you keep cool, Erik?
I will do my best. I've got my fan going here in the background, so if you hear a gentle hum, it's my Dyson.
Your love beads. So, excellent. Well, and Nathan, have you got a heat wave out there at the moment, or is it nice and cool?
No, it's not nice and cool at all. It's a heat wave. I also have a fan going in the background.
Well, I can't hear it anyway, so it's good they're all keeping cool. In fact, it's where I am. It's kind of overcast and grey and mid-20s, so it's perfect recording weather. But Joseph, how are you doing this fine day?
I'm okay right now, but the other day I actually had a bit of heat exhaustion mowing my lawn. It was so hot.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, and I had to mow the lawn because the grass was looking like an ocean of grass.
I was going to say, was the grass blue?
No, it's just so thick, and like they're so people like the city, they'll fine you for having like an unkempt yard, and it was getting to that point, and I didn't want to get a fine, so I had to bear the heat and get out there and mow the yard, but I overdid it, and I was like shaking and had cold chills, and I had to like take a long nap just to kind of reset myself.
I was a bit like that when I heard that Toya album, but I'm glad you're okay anyway. So,
dinkus.
Well, let's have a quick chat about what we've been watching recently before we get onto the charms of Zombie Island. Erik, how about you? Have you seen anything you want to tell us about?
No, I was just feeling too ill on that from listening to the Susie album.
Oh dear. Okay, so what have you seen? Anything?
Nothing horror related. No, I've been watching old TV series from the late 70s, early 80s. One of which is The Incredible Hulk, starring Bill Bixby, which I probably put down to generating my interest in horror, because I used to be quite freaked out by the transformation scenes in the Hulk. which are hokey now in retrospect, but I still enjoy the series. But in terms of horror, no, we've got a commentary track coming up, so I've been watching that film, which we can't mention yet, but it is a big title. And I have been catching up on some 2003 horror for our top threes on the Patreon feed this month. So that's all.
And did the Incredible Hulk also ignite your interest in burly men?
I'd like to say no, but the truth is yes.
Yes, okay. Well, thank you, Erik. Nathan, how about you?
No, I am in the same category as Erik in that we've got several things coming up, so I'm trying to find the time to watch those. I haven't had time to really watch much else, unfortunately, but I do intend to set aside some time this week to watch. I think I'm going to watch The Black Phone, so I will report back on that after I watch it.
Okay. Well, someone who has watched The Black Phone is Joseph.
Well, The Black Phone is the only thing I watched, and the film, it centers around a serial child abductor in a small town community, and they've dubbed him the Grabber. And basically, he's like I guess he's like kind of like he puts on a facade of being a magician, and he kind of like does all this showmanship in front of these small children so he can abduct them. And he's played by Ethan Hawke in kind of an against type casting decision. And his latest victim is this young bullied boy who can, I guess, quote unquote, take a punch, to quote the movie, but is often reluctant to fight back until he finds himself locked in the Grabber's basement with this inexplicable telephone that allows him to receive calls from the former victims of its kidnapper. And basically, they sort of aid the boy in this escape from the house. The film is set in 1978, and the period detail is often really striking. The film plays into a lot of, I guess, the panic that hit American suburbs in the 1970s with this epidemic of child abductions going on, fairly well, at least to start. But it quickly, and I do mean quickly, runs out of steam before settling into this frustratingly obtuse rhythm of chucking in distraction after distraction and ultimately going nowhere. I mean, first, the casting of Ethan Hawke as the Grabber might inspire some curiosity, but he spends 98% of the movie behind a mask, and he doesn't really do anything that, any old community theater actor or a stuntman couldn't handle. So, why they decided to cast him, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe for novelty's sake, and I know he worked with Scott Derrickson, the director, on Sinister, I believe it was, but the film actually belongs to child actor Mason Thames, and he has to concoct this sort of, with a black telephone, he has to concoct this sort of supernatural prison break with his minimal surroundings and that plot-armored telephone. The Hawk character kind of lurks outside the basement door, so there's all this kind of, I guess there's a little bit of suspense there, but the story, as bizarre as it may be, it's kind of rife with promise, and it really should lean on a few of its close calls, but it doesn't. It decides to, to borrow a phrase from Justin, it's kind of a case of the Emperor's New Clothes, offering shiny distractions that lead to narrative dead ends until, the movie finally just hobbles into the end credits. It's 105 minutes, so it's entirely too long. And by taking such a kitchen sink approach to what should be a focused story, it loses any momentum it may possess because we have so many plot threads and characters to process, and they go nowhere. And it seems to be getting raves across the board too. And I frankly found it insufferably boring. And that to me is the most egregious sin a film can commit. It looks good. It's certainly well acted, but it just did nothing for me, I'm afraid.
Oh, so that's not a ringing endorsement then?
No, it's not.
Oh, you're welcome.
You're warming yourself up, aren't you?
Yeah.
Can only be uphill from now.
Up Joe Hill, who wrote the film.
He did write the film, doesn't he? So Stephen King's son. Wasn't it based on a short story of his?
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of King in a way. Though he just decides to throw in everything and see what sticks. And here, maybe one or two things stick, but the rest is just kind of, that's it. That's what everyone's raving about.
Okay, well, I'll still probably check it out, but it's not a ringing endorsement, as Erik said. But I'm sure we'll chip in when we get a chance. So So, well, thank you, Joseph. Anything else, or is that your...
That's it for me this week.
Well, for me, there's just one thing that we've seen, which I can want another podcast to listen to, is Hollywood Crime Scene. And they're on kind of holiday at the moment. They pre-recorded their kind of movie club, sort of like 90s thrillers. And I think I mentioned before, I've been on a bit of a sort of 90s thriller tip. So rewatched Cape Fear the other day, the Martin Scorsese one, which again is I haven't seen since I was at cinema, and it's kind of horror-ish, I kind of guess. But the one, it's not really horror film, but is that kind of 90s thriller which I hadn't seen before, which they did an episode on, was The Crush with Gary Yules and Alicia Silverstone, which is kind of a 90s kind of daft thriller updating of Lolita, I can guess, to some degree. It's the kind of film that, like, Lolita wouldn't be made now, and it's the kind of the Crush. I couldn't imagine them making The Crush now because... if you've not seen it, I mean, the basic premise is Gary Yules rents a kind of sort of a small property on the grounds of this kind of a big house where 15-year-old Alicia Silverstone, playing 14-year-old, I think, lives, and she develops a crush on him, which becomes deadly and psychotic. So if you've seen, you've seen any kind of 90s thrillers, you know exactly where it's going to go. And it does do that, but it does it with quite a lot of fun. It's also got Jennifer Rubin in, of course, you remember from, I think it's Nightmare on Elm Street 3. But yeah, so it's kind of, it goes places that you just wouldn't get away with now, even though this was only 1993, so just under 20 years old. But so The Crush, is that one? I guess it's probably one you've all seen, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I love The Crush. Cary Elwes, he's so bland until he punches Alicia Silverstone in the face and sends her flying across a room. And for me, the movie's a lot like, that scene pretty much encapsulates that movie. It's so trashy and silly. And I love Jennifer Rubin. I think she's the standout here, actually. I think Cary Elwes is boring. And Alicia Silverstone, she's good, but I don't know. I wanted Cary Elwes to just fuck off and follow Jennifer Rubin for a while. I love the movie, though. Yeah, I did get to get a chuckle out of the fact that the father, Alicia Silverstone's character's father, had got a full-scale fairground carousel ride in his attic. Yeah, I guess it's piecemeal. I don't know, but that must have taken a while.
It was big, and it was just like through a little hole, as it were.
Sounds like my Saturday nights.
Pardon, Nathan? Have you seen The Crush?
I have. It's been a very long time though, but talking about that makes me want to rewatch it.
It's quite a lot of fun. So, and Erik, have you seen it?
I haven't, no, but I do want to. It sounds fun.
I think you get a kick out of it. Yeah, so it's okay. Well, I guess that means that we're now headed to Zombie Island. So here is the typically Troma-esque trailer. Well, actually, I don't know if it's Troma-esque trailer. Well, we'll see. See what you think. This is the trailer for Zombie Island Massacre.
We cordially invite you to escape to a marvelous tropical paradise. It's an island of peaceful beaches and happy tourists. Welcome to beautiful Zombie Island. Come on, grab a seat on our air-conditioned Zombie Island tour bus.
I think I can safely promise you a tour you'll never forget.
So refresh yourself and get ready for the fun-filled excitement of Zombie Island Massacre. In Zombie Island Massacre, you'll witness ancient voodoo ceremonies. And if you're very lucky, and for no extra charge, you might even get to participate in these picturesque rituals. So come on down. Sample the world-famous Zombie Island cuisine. Cannibalism.
German, French, and Italian, all on cannibalism.
Yes, Zombie Island Massacre, where young lovers take fun-filled vacations of terror, torture, violence, and death. Zombie Island Massacre, where you can take a nature walk through the lush tropical jungle. Zombie Island Massacre, where you can take a moonlit swim in crystal clear freshwater streams. The best snorkeling in the free world. where a healthy midnight jog brings you back to your tranquil luxury accommodations. You won't believe your senses when you find out the blood-curdling truth behind Zombie Island Massacre. The producers of Zombie Island Massacre are proud to feature international superstar Rita Jenrette. Yes, you must visit Zombie Island, playground of the very rich. Zombie Island is the beautiful people's favorite hotspot. On romantic Zombie Island, you'll lose your heart. You'll also lose your head. Zombie Island Massacre. It's a one-way ticket to a fun-filled vacation of terror, torture, and violence. Zombie Island Massacre.
Sorry, what was the film called again?
I think it was called Zombie Island Massacre.
Ah.
It's, yes, Americans on vacation in the Caribbean take a tour of a nearby island at night and watch a local voodoo ritual. Soon after, they find themselves stranded on the island and under attack by unseen foes. One by one, they meet violent ends. So, yes, Zombie Island Massacre. You caught that, didn't you, Erik?
Well, sorry again, remind me again?
Jot it down, just so you remember, Zombie Island Massacre.
Okay.
So, yes, this is a film that I hadn't seen before, and it's one that always kind of popped up in the periphery, and it's kind of, we talked about it before, I'm not a big Troma fan, if I'm honest. I can watch a few of them, but Troma's not my go-to for entertainment. If I'm honest. But Troma did, in the early 80s, pick up a number of titles which they didn't really have anything to do with apart from theatrically distributing them or putting them out on video or DVD later down the line, including Splatter University, Girls School Screamers, and Zombie Island Massacre, which originally, I think one of the problems with Zombie Island Massacre is people expecting a zombie movie. And if you go to IMDb and look at the comments, it's just full of people going, there's no zombie action. It's not a zombie movie. To be fair, the film was originally called The Last Picnic, which doesn't make any sense either because there's no picnic in it either. But you do get a tiny bit of zombie action where you have this kind of I don't know. It's kind of like it's like an American version of Eyeball in so much you've got these kind of American tourists are all either oversexed or I've got angina pills or whatever. It's kind of a typical kind of 70s, it feels more like a 70s movie where you've got like films like Up from the Depths or something where you've got Americans in sort of tropical locale being menaced by something. And here, rather than a zombie, all you do see is you kind of see a zombie coming back to life in this voodoo ritual, which they're taken on excursion to this island to watch. But this zombie comes back to life and then presumably dispatched by the head priest. It's very choppily edited, so it's a bit difficult to tell. But then it moves directly into a not pastiche exactly, but a very much Friday the 13th territory. So much so that Harry Manfredini recycles his Friday the 13th theme tunes shamelessly, I would say. I mean, there's some. I think the only kind of change really, I mean, is there's some kind of reggae beats, kind of sort of occasionally, or some calypso. But there's certainly, if you're familiar with the Friday the 13th soundtracks and themes and kind of sort of sonic stings, then you'll definitely recognize a fellow traveler here. So it's what happens is the kind of this ragtag group of tourists I kind of find themselves marooned after their bus driver is murdered. And they have to try and find, get to safety, and they get picked off one by one by a very strange killer who not only is incredibly smelly, which I think is probably one of the first things, although I imagine Jason Voorhees probably hasn't had a bath, although maybe if he lives in Crystal Lake, maybe he's squeaky clean, I don't know. But who's dressed as one of the characters says, like either a bear or a bird, which was kind of a bit strange. And so you've got this kind of killer who's kind of dressed like a shrub, really. He's a shrub and got like it's feathers, and so they're being chased around this island by this sort of machete wielding killer. And you really get into this kind of one by one, sort of quick kind of sort of slashing, people falling into pits with spikes, people being garroted, bashed to their heads with logs. And the film kind of goes on in that kind of vein until it does a complete bizarre 180 turn at the kind of 2/3 mark, and then turns into something more like Manimal or A-Team. And we'll probably talk about that. But it's it's a very strange beast, this. But the reason that I've been put off watching it for so long was that I kind of presumed it was a Troma zombie movie, which I was not particularly interested in. But actually, for at least half its running time, it is kind of pure early 80s cheese-tastic slash Friday the 13th kind of pastiche slashing going on. So if you've been put off watching it and you do have a stomach for early 80s cheese, and if you don't, then why you listen to this podcast? But if you do, then I think you can have quite a lot of fun with it. It's not, when I reviewed it, I kind of said it's not bad enough to be really laugh out loud funny. It's not good enough to really work as a good slasher or horror movie. It kind of falls somewhere in between. Some of the line readings are hilarious, but there's kind of a sense of, a charm about it for me. I think it's the early 80s-ness of it. And also, say, some of the character acting is quite hilarious. And also some of the stunts as well. And some of these special effects, including a very fake-looking decapitation, which clearly was borrowed. Mrs. Voorhees wanted her head back. And we'll talk about it. But actually, one of the special effects people who did this was obviously worked under Tom Savini on the first Friday the 13th, and also worked on the sequel in 1981. But yeah, there's an awful lot of fun stuff to talk about, and also behind the scenes, as I said on the run up to this, is possibly more interesting than the film itself. But I'd be interested to hear what you guys think of Zombie Island Massacre. Yes, that's right, Erik, you heard that right. That's what we're talking about today. So Erik, what are your thoughts on this movie?
Yeah, first time watch for me as well. I don't know if I would have been drawn to a Troma film called Zombie Island Massacre otherwise, unless we had been forced to watch it for the podcast. Like you, I just would have seen the title and thought, it's Troma trying to cash in on zombies. It's not going to end up well at all. But what I noticed, first of all, that it opened with some very distinctive sounding music, and then Harry Manfredini's name comes up in the credits, and I wouldn't say he is a one-trick pony, kind of. If you listen to a score for House or any of the other films he's done outside of Friday the 13th, they all have a Friday the 13th flavour. And this one sounded very much like the music for Friday 5, A New Beginning, which would have been probably in production around the same time as this, possibly. So that was kind of comforting, I suppose, to hear a familiar kind of slasher score. The next thing I noticed was that in the opening scene where the guy scares his wife in the shower by wearing that sort of ritualistic mask, they've got a phone right beside the toilet, and that is really disgusting. Nobody wants to be making phone calls whilst they're going poo-poo. That's I also like the fact in that opening sequence that all of them have to be phoned to be told, look, the bus is about to go on this trip, and they're all in the middle of shagging or showering, or none of them are ready. It's like they're the most disorganized bunch of tourists I've ever seen. As for the slasher elements of the film, I mean, it as you said, it's endearing. I think he put it quite well when he said it's not bad enough to be funny and not good enough to be good as such. It kind of falls in between, which is, it's this kind of middle area where you find films that, you find less engaging, I suppose. I would have preferred it to have been much more of a mess in a kind of Bloody Moon or, Doris Wishman type of way. But as it is, it's actually quite well made for this type of thing. I suppose a low budget early 80s slasher, it is actually quite well made. And as you said, it does go off on very strange tangent about 75% of the way through the film. Things I picked up on that I loved. I love there's a honeymooning couple who disappear into the woods for some nookie and they get killed, but nobody knows that yet. So the people who are the rest of the tourists, they leave the bus behind because it's broken down. They go to find an old villa that they saw on the way in, and they leave a map for these honeymooners, which is basically just 2 lines. It's like a right angle. It's like the least detailed map I've ever seen. I thought that was great fun. I liked the zombie Holocaust vibe I got from the film. I don't know why I was thinking zombie Holocaust, but I think it's probably the incessant ritualistic tribal drumming maybe that's playing throughout the film. It just reminded me of that's the zombie element I was getting from the film. And I thought the potential was there for kind of a Caribbean, gosh, I'm not American, a Caribbean, I should have said. Caribbean is what you and what Joseph and Nathan would say. I'd say Caribbean. A Caribbean version of Friday the 13th. I thought the elements were kind of in place for that, with all these tourists, broken down bus, going to a villa for help. It could have been really good. And I mean, there are occasional moments that I thought lifted it. I mean, when that guy Matt and his girlfriend fall into the pit of spikes, the decapitation of Joe, as you said, is quite hilarious, and the fact that the severed head seems to have a bit of an afterlife after it's detached from the body, which was kind of fun. I don't know, a strange choice, I thought. There was flashbacks by Joe's wife after he's been killed, and I don't really understand why there's flashbacks for that character, because they're not the quote final girl or the final boy. It just felt really out of place to have sort of flashbacks. She's thinking back to romantic times they had together before he met his maker, and it was very strange, I thought. So yeah, I mean, there's an unusual trajectory to this film that I quite liked. It changes genres completely, as you said, in the final 20 minutes. The two villains of the piece I thought were very atypical of the normal. I'll go further into that thought when we reveal who's behind all the mayhem. So as I said, I thought the potential was there for kind of eyeball on a tropical island, but there's just something a little bit ho-hum about the film overall, I thought. I mean, it's better than I expected, but my expectations were so low that it wouldn't have been difficult for it to rise above that. For me, when it's playing as a conventional slasher movie, the killer's look is offbeat for sure, but I didn't find it terribly sinister or scary. As you said, we get close-ups of the killer's legs at one stage, and I think, did you describe on the website that they look kind of like Big Bird? It kind of looks like a Muppet. It's all these feathery ankles it has. And the other thing is there's lots of interchangeable characters, and I kind of got lost keeping up with who was who. But overall, watchable enough, but not much more than that for me.
Okay, well, thank you. It's kind of, I think it's interesting, isn't it, with like the, I mean, when we get onto background, we'll probably see why it turned in such a kind of masterpiece. But I did think that it was quite funny, that the flashback with Rita Jenret's character and Joe, who's, she has this huge kind of sort of a piece to camera, doesn't she, about her great love, even though he's kind of like, he's kind of this fat-assed kind of loser who just kind of does practical jokes on her, and she talks about him as if he's the love of her life, which it kind of made me laugh. It also made me laugh when he's decapitated and they come out and go, "Are you all right?" Thank you, Erik. Nathan, I imagine if anyone here has a soft spot for Zombie Island Massacre, it might be you.
You would be correct, but I should also say that I also kind of agree with you in that the whole it's not bad enough to be like funny, but definitely not good enough to be a good horror movie. I feel like it almost feels like they went out of their way to not make it scary whatsoever, because there's no like tense moments for me in this film or suspense. I mean, it just, I don't know, it just kind of goes along. Like, I dig the early 80s atmosphere. I love that decapitation sequence because it's one of the worst that I've seen, which also makes it one of the best. And I definitely was going to discuss Sandy, Rita Jenret's character, having her moment where she has flashbacks, to their happier times. And it just goes to show you what I've told you guys before. These people have families.
And loved ones.
So, I mean, she cared that Joe was dead. So, yeah, I mean, it shows you the hard, part of that sequence. But in general, I didn't think the slasher elements were utilized fantastically. Like, I kind of preferred more body count time. I mean, several people die from gunshots in the same scene, and then there's the people that get pulled into the water. So a lot of the death scenes are just nothing to write home about. And that's one draw to a slasher movie for me, is I like when they have like crazy wild death scenes. And this one didn't really have that very much. I thought that there were a lot of elements that could have been done differently, could have made it better, maybe a little bit more entertaining. Cause it does, drag in some places, the pacing. But in general, I mean, I do like the film, and, I like it well enough. I just wish that they had done a few things differently. And that is my Tupperware.
Okay. Well, thank you for filling us with your Tupperware. Joseph, how about you?
Well, first of all, Eric, how dare you assume I say Caribbean instead of Caribbean?
Well, do you say Caribbean?
I say both. It just depends on the sentence structure. So you should apologize for that. But yeah,
I'm sorry.
No, I had seen Zombie Island Massacre a long time ago, and I recall it being better than it is. I agree with you guys. I don't know, like The Black Phone, which popped up in my recently seen. This is another film that takes what should be a simple, kind of a concise premise and peppers it with distraction after distraction. But unlike The Black Phone, the parts here actually lead to a fairly rousing, if not entirely successful sum. The film really reminded me of a Calypso kind of voodoo Friday the 13th amalgam. You got that Harry Manfredini score and a sprawling kind of a New Beginning style cast who do not much but bicker and die, without having to dig too deep to find any sort of pathos. We've also got a reanimated corpse for whatever reason that adds nothing to the plot, but it does at least give the film a pleasing title worthy of marquee status. Boobs pop out of blouses at just the right time, and there's a killer dressed up like a shrub, picking off the cast one by one in a variety of ways. And the cast, they kind of eyeball their way across the island looking for help. And none of this really adds up to anything meaningful or suspenseful, but it sure is entertaining on kind of a base level. The recycled Manfredini score somehow adds a touch of class, and I put that word in quotations. The characters are nondescript, but, likable. The fashions, this is where it really, shines for me. The fashions straddle that not so fine line between 70s leftovers like, neckerchiefs and drab pantsuits and that high-haired neon approach, post 1983 or 84, stuff like that we come to love and appreciate. And there are a handful of great moments peppered throughout, such as the scene where the two characters fall into a pit of spikes that's like all of 2 feet deep. How they are brutally impaled and not, I don't know, having to bandage an ankle or something is beyond me. But hey, spike pits are always fun in these kind of movies. And I love how even the most, benign scenes like a door opening is peppered with that Manfredini musical sting, like a door open. It's like, dun-dun! Like it's supposed to be suspenseful, and they do this over and over again. And Rita Jenrette's boohoo crying moment near the end is really Oscar material incarnate. I mean, come on. So yeah, it doesn't add up to much in the grand scheme of slashers movies, but I would be lying if I said it was boring. It's definitely not boring. So a marginal recommendation from me. It's not great, but it's not bad.
Well, I think that's about as good as it's going to get, but I think I would agree. Like you say, it's not. It's a shame that, if they'd gone with the courage of their convictions and just made like Calypso Friday the 13th, but I think there's still, there's still enough in there. I mean, even down to having the stoner couple, which, is complete Friday the 13th Part 3. I mean, even the stoner character, he mentions something about this when they were stuck on the bus, like going, how are we going to get out of this? And he said this was just meant to be a nice picnic. But I don't understand this whole picnic angle. When did they have it? They had a picnic on the boat, didn't they, before they left? But is my understanding of picnic different to everyone else's? That you go out somewhere and then you have food and drink in the woods or in the countryside.
I mean, I always assumed it was like placing a blanket on in a field somewhere and you get a basket full of food. Yeah, and there's nothing like that in this film.
No.
So why it was called The Last Picnic? See, I think, again, we get onto some background. We'll probably see why there were changes made. I mean, the other thing that kind of always made me laugh was that character who spotted we later find out is kind of in on, I mean, we'll talk about, we're going to spoil things. If you've not seen it, then, of course, as ever, please do go and watch the movie first, if you can bring yourself to do so. But she says she's spotted this huge mansion from the bus that no one else saw. And then she says the reason was, you don't have my fine painter's eye, which I thought was quite hilarious. I also like the fact that the killer kind of had, rather than heavy breathing, had this kind of snoring sound, which kind of was very strange. But it was kind of also, the other thing that made me laugh was when Joe finds that gun in the bushes of the house within about 5 seconds of going outside to look. It's just at night. It's just all full of all sorts of strange things. And then there was the old couple, George and Ethel, and I think one of them suggests that she might have committed suicide, which was very strange. The whole thing was just kind of completely ridiculous. But I kind of thought it was, if you put your mind into neutral, you can have fun with it. And if we were going to spoil it, I mean, the whole thing comes down to the actual reason why people are being killed is even more ridiculous, is that there's this huge kind of drug running cartel on the island, and they believe that one of the people on this who's come to see the voodoo ceremony is an informant for the CIA or the DEA or something, which it actually turns out that one of them is working for the DEA. And so they're killing everyone on the bus one by one to try and find out who the informant is. It turns out there's not one killer, but like it's a drug cartel all dressed as Big Bird, killing these American tourists one by one. So it also turns out that the woman who has the fine painter's eye, and I haven't got a name in front of me, but she is also a drug runner, and she's got like a huge stash of cocaine, and that the house that they end up in belongs to this old man who is also part of the drug cartel.
Yeah, these are the two people, that I think are unbelievable as two kind of drug dealers, and they include, like, she has a line of dialogue that's like, show me the candy, and he's like, it's grade A stuff. And like, it's this elderly man and this middle-aged, well-dressed woman. It's just completely opposite to the way drug dealers look like in any other film I've ever seen. I thought it was really fun.
She looks like she's about to go shoot JR or something, and I don't know, this whole ruse is so needlessly complicated it becomes laughable. It's like, why couldn't it just be some, African or some Calypso tribesmen just killing people, and they have to bring in all like this whole DEA angle, and someone's trying to sell drugs, someone's going to take a cut of the loot, and it's so ridiculous.
And also, can anyone enlighten me why the old man has books on cannibalism in every language known to man?
Anthropophagy.
But it doesn't make any sense, does it? Because I don't know, there isn't any cannibalism in the movie, and there's no real reason for them to add that angle in. And also, the other thing that didn't make any sense: why were the killers all smell of rotting meat?
Was that a distraction to make them think that it was something to do with the voodoo tribe?
Yeah, it's very Scooby-Doo. I mean, it is.
Well, it's funny you should say this. Now, this is skipping ahead to my background, but there were 2 sequels made to this film. One is called Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, where Shaggy double-crosses some Scooby snack-dealing criminals, and they all get killed off one by one, and they escape in the Mystery Machine. No, that's the plot's not true, but the title is true. There's Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island and Scooby-Doo Returns to Zombie Island. But I'm guessing they have nothing to do with this film, but I'm only guessing because I haven't seen them.
I wonder if they pull off the hood at the end and the killer's revealed to be one of Rita Jenneret's boobs.
Which do pop out, inexplicably.
Now, she's described in the trailer you played, Justin, as international superstar, I think was the term they used to describe her, but I'd never heard of her before this. Now, I know she has an interesting backstory, but I have to admit I'd never heard of her.
Yeah, well, I think it was kind of stunt casting, wasn't it, really, for to put her in this. And I'm sure we'll kind of come on to her backstory, which you say it would make a much more interesting movie in itself, I'm sure. But it is such a strange mishmash of genres. And I kind of guess, I wonder if it's because by 1983 or whenever it was, well, we'll get on to when it was made, that, we certainly saw past the kind of heyday of the slasher movie, kind of like from 1982 onwards, that they were trying to sort of do things with a slasher movie that were kind of, it kind of run out of steam as there were so many. It was kind of oversaturation. The market was completely oversaturated with slasher movies that they either tried to make them not look like slasher movies, like Mortuary or the films along those lines, or they tried to do kind of variations on the slasher theme. And I kind of guess that's kind of what they were trying to do here, isn't it? But it's it's a very strange thing. Although I suppose maybe the other option was that it was more of a straight ahead kind of drug cartel thriller, like an action movie, and then they kind of tried to shoehorn a Friday 13th kind of subplot into it. But I'm not sure if we'll ever find out. But anything left to say on the film before we do some background?
I think we've covered it. My understand, the old man who shows up at the end and he's revealed to be in on it. Was he dressed up at any point in the film? Was he like one of the shrubsmen? Because he looks a little portly and he doesn't look like slender like those guys. So I didn't know. I kind of, one of the scenes I did love in the movie is when they kind of they rig up this electrocuted bit of metal and so kind of give the killer an electric shock, even though the bit of metal is about 1 foot squared, and it's at the bottom of some steps, even though they don't know the killer's going to come down that way.
Yeah, it's the old Killer in the Snowman shtick.
Exactly. And also I did like one of the killer when they were crossing that bridge, across the river, and the killer was hiding underneath the bridge. That is like the Killer in the Snowman, isn't it? They kind of have the idea that the killer knows where they're going to be. So, well, let's talk a bit about some background. So, Nathan, what do you have for us?
On the artwork, the woman on the artwork is Denise Texiera, who is also the red-haired woman with fantastic fashion sense in Splatter University.
And she's not in this film.
No, but I thought that was fun trivia. Now on to your guys's.
Wow, I love the grammar.
Erik, how about you?
I only have a few bits and bobs. I know you've got loads, Justin, because you've just put up a review of it on Hysteria Lives, and it's quite comprehensive. But I would just say that this didn't get released in the UK until 1990, when it must have looked really kind of outdated by then. It was released on VHS. John Carter, who directed this, not John Carter of Mars, different one. One of his few directing credits, but he was editor on some big movies, including Karate Kid 3, which is a favorite of mine. It's much maligned, but I love it. Boomerang and Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit. So he edited all of those. There's a band called the Cheese Dogs, and they released a single in 1981 called Rita Jenrette, which I'm presuming tied in with her kind of revelations she made in a Playboy article in April of that year, where she said she had sex with her husband on the steps of the US Capitol during a break in the all-night house session. As you do. She must have been uncontrollable hussy. Anyway, I'll let you guys take over.
I was just going to say, just on that, just before we go to you, Joseph, just going to say that when you look at the political scandals now, and that, to think that in 1980, whenever it was in the 70s, when that happened, it was this huge political scandal, is crazy when you think about what happens now and what people just seem to get away with now. So thank you, Erik. Joseph, how about you?
Yeah, I know it was originally shot around late 1983 or early 1984 under that Last Picnic title, but it never got picked up, so they retitled it, I guess, Zombie Island Massacre, which is a more marquee style name, in mid-1984. And I was shocked that it actually played in cinemas. I know it played regionally at mostly single screens and drive-ins from the end of 1984 and into 1986. According to newspapers.com and the Wayback Machine. I know it played in my home state of Tennessee in late 1984 at both the North and South Cinemas in Nashville with all-day screenings. Had all-day screenings in late 1984 at Myrtle Cinema 6 in Myrtle Beach, Florida. It played at the East Bay Parkway in Oakland, California in October of 1985. at 6:50 and 10:10 daily, with weekend matinees at 12:10 and 3:30. And it shared that complex at the time with The Mutilator, Reanimator, and Silver Bullet, to name a few titles. So, good company there. And it got a special 2-day only weekend screening in October of 1986 at Naaman's Drive-In, located in Claymont, Delaware. It was a featured kind of a trauma triple bill starting at 7:30 and ending at midnight. And it was preceded by Class of Nukem High and The Toxic Avenger. And it played at the 1986 Fanta Festival in Rome at a single 10:30 p.m. showing. And my Italian is rudimentary at best, but I believe director John Carter was in attendance at the Fanta Festival screening. I could be wrong there, but the film also saw its first VHS release, stateside at least, in June of 1988 via the media label, and had a video store pre-order in May, and it would be reissued on VHS and DVD via Troma in 1997. The media tape in particular was quite rare in my part of town, at least, and from around 40 or so different video stores that cropped up in the greater Chattanooga area, I think maybe only one of those shops had a copy for rental, and I never rented it until the 90s. It retailed for $79.95, and so adjusted for inflation, that would be about $206 today. Wow, that's quite expensive. I know on the TV side, it had a moderate run on HBO, though I was unable to determine, its first air date, but it was sometime in 1988 or 89. Erik briefly mentioned John Carter and his editing on The Karate Kid and Boomerang. And he also did the Ice Cube comedy Friday, which I love, and lots of kind of African-American centric films in the late 90s into the 21st century. But perhaps his biggest credit was the 1973 sex farce, I Could Never Have Sex with Any Man Who Has So Little Regard for My Husband, which shattered Academy Award records, I'm sure. I love that title.
It's a brilliant title. Yeah, spotted that one.
Yeah, but he passed away in 2018 at the age of 95, and he was still working into his 80s. So he had a pretty good career there. Going back to the VHS releases, the Troma issue proudly displays the following blurb featuring controversial Playboy cover girl and ex-congressman's wife Rita Jenrette. And if you're at all familiar with the Abscan sting in the late 70s and early 1980s, you'll know she's had quite the interesting career in life outside of Zombie Island Massacre. First, she had a successful modeling career in the 70s as a spokesperson for Clairol. She authored 2 very different books. The first in 1981 called My Capital Secrets, which I haven't read, but I assume it details her marriage to Congressman John Jenrette. The other book was a romance novel published in 1985 called Conglomerate. But she did, like you mentioned, she made waves in the early 80s when her then husband, John Jenrette, was indicted in October of 1980 for taking a bribe during that Abscam fiasco. And she testified in her husband's defense, but later disclosed that she found $25,000 in cold hard cash in her husband's closet, and saying that she believed it was funds from that Abscan investigation. And she detailed in a 1981 article in Playboy that she and John, like you said, had sex on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. And the public at large is kind of, miffed with her at that. And she was on Sally Jesse Raphael to kind of defend themselves. But they quickly divorced soon after. I guess they couldn't weather that storm. She did make a second appearance in Playboy in 1984. She made 2 appearances in Playboy, actually. Yeah, would also have a semi-successful stint on A Current Affair, interviewing various celebrities. She mentioned in a 1985 issue of Inside on the News, she says, Zombie Island Massacre was my first feature film. I'm not going to defend it or anything, but it was a valuable experience for me. And she later became a power broker in real estate, having infamously sued Simon Properties in the late 90s for $6 million she was owed in commissions from the sale of the General Motors building in New York to one Donald Trump for $800 million, and they settled out of court there, of course. And honestly, there's a lot more about Zombie Island Massacre as it pertains to background, but I don't want to take away any more than I already have, so that's all I have.
Okay, well, thank you, Joseph. Yeah, well, Rita Jenrette, is it Jenrette or Jenrette?
It's Jenrette.
She's just a couple of other things about her, because I think it's kind of fascinating. But she was she actually launched. She's a really interesting character because in some ways she's like the Kardashian of her day, in so much she's someone who's famous for being infamous. Without the scandal with her husband, arguably she may not to take anything away from her successes, but certainly she was trying to capitalize on the infamy, and she actually tried to launch a pop career. Apparently she recorded a country and western song called "It Gives Me the Lowdown Blues Ever Since You Found Money Stashed in My Shoe," which is relating back to the 25,000 her husband had allegedly taken in bribes. Again, I mean, just adds all this kind of color to everything. But she was in the Playboy in 1981. She described kind of hot tub parties, and also she claimed to have worked with infamous African dictator Idi Amin to free American hostages. I'm not quite sure. I never got to the bottom of that, but that was quite kind of interesting. One of the things was that in some of the press articles when she talks about this movie, her background was that she was meant to be this New York fashion designer who was about to marry for the fourth time, who was taking a honeymoon before the latest wedding to make sure it isn't taking and making another mistake, which didn't come across at all in this. So it was obviously kind of ended up on the editing floor if it was ever sort of done. Now, she kind of claimed to regret doing the nudity in the film, because this film I think it was filmed early or in 1983. So when it came out and she's being interviewed about this, she kind of tried to put it behind her. Although she did, the interviews I've seen with her where she did it with fairly good humour. She said that she was putting nudity behind her. She wouldn't have done the shower scene or the other nude scenes, but she said she would basically get her boobs out for Shakespeare, which I thought was very, very, very good of her. And she said she was in good company with the likes of Deborah Winger and Angie Dickinson of doing nudity. So there's nothing to be ashamed of. But and she kind of said she did it in a way it was almost to challenge herself, that she was trying to be controversial. But interestingly, she when she talked about being on the set, she said it was very instrumental for her, and she thought it was very interesting. But she said she was quite annoyed by some of the other actors and actresses who were no names, and she said they were acting in a very kind of demanding way, as if they were big stars. And so she had she admitted the film was campy. She said that it had been shown at Cannes Film Festival, I think you might have mentioned, or one of the Italian film festivals, and she thought it was going to make a lot of money. And she said Zombie Island Massacre is simply a low-budget B movie. You just can't critique it, which I think is a thing. Now, somewhat awkwardly, on the release of Zombie Island Massacre, she refound Christ. So she became born again, and she kind of announced that God was her agent now, which was obviously God turned out to be a little bit of a lousy agent. She didn't get any more major roles. But as you mentioned, Joseph, she went on to a successful career as a TV journalist for Fox, and also the very successful career in real estate. But then she, the final sting in the tail for this, her tale, is that, and actually one of the reasons why I actually thought of watching this in the first place is I read an article in the Guardian newspaper about a kind of fight between an Italian princess and her sons from her husband's first marriage, who had since died, and they were fighting over a $471 million historic villa, which has the only ceiling fresco known by Caravaggio. And it turned out that Princess Rita Conbangi Ludovici is actually Rita Jeanette. So she became a Italian princess later in her life, and she's currently sitting tenant in a villa worth almost $500 million. So in 1985, she told Insight on the news magazine, "I feel like at the age of 35, I've lived perhaps 10 lives in one lifetime. I've lived many, many lives." So I think that's, like I say, I'm sure a movie of her life is begging to be made. But just a couple of quick other things. One of the things I've thought, one of the reasons why the film is so disjointed is perhaps The original person who was going to play what's the candy like? Show me the candy actress, who was taken over by Diane Claire Holub. Eventually, it was Karen Lingorny who'd been an actress in Saturday Night Fever. So she was meant. So the filming had begun in August of 1982. But Lingorny had a breakdown on set and became convinced that there was a voodoo curse on her, which caused her to go completely crazy. And director John Carter, in an interview for a local newspaper, elaborated in 1985. He said, the day before we began principal photography, our leading lady, Karen Gorney, got ill psychologically. She was throwing furniture around, saying the voodoos were chasing her and evil spirits were trying to hurt her. So that kind of obviously delayed the movie for quite a long time. Now, the guy who plays the DEA agent, David Broadnax, he's kind of an interesting character. He was a co-producer on the movie. And I think he kind of wrote this, or he not wrote it, but he kind of wanted to be, he kind of said he was kind of like basically going to be the next black Sylvester Stallone. So although it doesn't really come across in his movie, he doesn't come across as, although there is some fight scenes where he fights the killer and beats him off, as it were. Now, talking about, it was mentioned about the director John Carter, and in an article in the Asbury Press in 1985, he talks about the chance to direct Zombie Island Massacre. He said, they asked me and I accepted, of course, and thanks to God, I had the opportunity to work on this film, even though it's not what I would call an ambitious movie. It's a thriller, yet it's not really to be taken seriously. So again, I think it kind of goes to show that it was, there's always that argument about early 80s or any kind of horror movie from yesteryear when you look thinking, are they in on the joke or not? And clearly Jen Rett and the director knew that the whole thing was fairly tongue-in-cheek, so I think they got the answer there. The rest of the cast were kind of a bit of, I couldn't find out much about them really. The one I recognise is Christina Mariel Wetzel as Barbie. She'd been in the teen comedy The First Turn On in 1983, which is co-directed, incidentally, by Lloyd Kaufman, and for a part that apparently Madonna reportedly auditioned for. So who knows? Madonna could have ended up as being Barbie in Zombie Island Massacre. So the mind does boggle. But she went on to have a brief career in musical theatre before making headlines again in 1993 as a co-pilot of a tourist helicopter that made a dramatic emergency landing in Central Park, New York City, after engine trouble. The rest of them are kind of, it's pretty much one and done. There's Ralph Monaco as Jerry. He had a long career with bit parts in films like Joe Zito's Blood Rage in 1980 and Exterminator, also 1980. The film itself obviously didn't get great reviews when it came out. Playboy gave it a One Bunny review, which apparently is I didn't know that was their system, but obviously One Bunny probably isn't a good review. And it said they praised Jen Rett's performance, which of course they probably would, as she'd been their cover star and been in 2 issues. But they said it was ho-hum beyond her charms. Lou Lumanek in the record called it an amateurish mishmash, and said the special effects score isn't good enough to please splatter movie fans, let alone frighten anyone over the age of 4. I think you mentioned Joseph, about Troma picking up the movie, although I did read somewhere that Lloyd Kaufman said this was one of the worst movies he'd ever picked up, which I think is saying something for a Troma release, isn't it? But I couldn't find anything to confirm that. But the film was released to North American screens in 1984 on a regional rollout and debuted in New York City on 75 screens in March of 1985. Unsurprisingly, they kind of milked Jen Rett's appearance for everything it was worth. The tagline for the movie was "Rita Jen Rett as you've never seen her before, a tour of terror." They bizarrely, the promotional notes compared it to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And I think the only reason I can get from that is I think the Troma hoped the Zombie Island Massacre would become a midnight cult hit too. And we mentioned, obviously, Nathan, you mentioned Denise Texera, who was on the poster for this but didn't appear in it. And apparently the last thing I shall mention is that one of the ways that Troma tried to get people into cinema was they lured patrons with a promise of free record composed by Harry Manfredini, featuring the vocals of Rita Jenrette on the A-side and backed with the NJRS version, both singing The Reggae Picnic. Although I'm not sure that was a great incentive, but I'm sure we'll be playing out with one of those versions at the end of the show, because I don't believe Susie did any reggae songs as far as I'm aware. So that is the background I have for Zombie Island Massacre, and hopefully you might agree the background is possibly more interesting than the film itself. But so there you go. So what's the kind of did we get any consensus at all on this on the group?
Well, I don't know if it was indifference or just shitty algorithms this week, but we only got 6 comments for this one. David J. Gehrig, he said, I was convinced this was going to be a steaming pile of shit when I popped in the blue from VS, that's Vinegar Syndrome, but it's actually a decent slasher. Need to rewatch maybe some of that special Nathan elixir tonight and spin it up again. And Walter Beepus states, rather emphatically, it's shockingly shite. Drank a lot of whiskey to sit through this one. Dull and plotting. Couldn't wait for it to end. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Listen on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and about a billion other podcatchers, both good and bad. We're also on Patreon, and we love our patrons long time. General feedback and helpful cooking tips can be sent to thehysteriacontinues@gmail.com.
Excellent. Yes. And we'll be also next month, we're going to be recording our Friday 13th commentary, aren't we, for our patrons. So we're looking forward to doing that. And as I think we mentioned, or maybe it was Nathan or someone mentioned, no, Erik, you mentioned we are recording a commentary for a Blu-ray release upcoming, but for one of the big titles. So obviously we can't say what that is at the moment, but as soon as we can, we will let you know. So, Erik, let's see if you can bring your joke of the week back from the dead with this.
It's my joke of the week. It's so great and fantastic.
What's a zombie's favorite Hysteria Continues feature? The Fango flashback.
I hear Justin laughing, actually, Erik.
That was better than some of your... I would say that was one that was not bad, Erik, so well done.
Thank you.
So, is there anything left to say? I presume we haven't got any feedback.
No, we have no feedback.
You dirty horse!
Erik, you can't speak to our dear listeners like that. So, okay. Well, what are we covering next time?
Oh, it's my choice, yes. I'm still not 100% convinced this is a slasher, but it's reviewed on Hysteria Lives, so I'm going with Axe, At Last, Total Terror, a.k.a. Lisa, and I think it has a few other... A California Axe Massacre is another title for it.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll look forward to doing that. And that was a video nasty, wasn't it?
And a very short video nasty. It's only like 70 minutes max. If it might even be shorter. But that hasn't influenced my decision to choose it.
Well, it is summertime, isn't it? So, but we're back to the 70s Grindhouse for Axe, a.k.a. Lisa. So we shall look forward to doing that. And I have to get around to watching X again, because that always reminds me. I'm not sure it's nothing like, because I haven't seen Axe for a long time, but I think it has that kind of, obviously, that 70s Grindhouse feel that they were going for in X. So I might sort of rewatch that ahead of doing this as well. So
Excellent.
Thank you. So, okay, right. Well, I can hear tribal drums in the background, so it's time for us to go. And I think we'll be playing out with the Reggae Picnic, the Harry Manfredini. I'm not sure if this is the Rita Jenrette. I'm not sure. I haven't found that one. I think it's NJRS, it sounds like, I don't know who they were. If they were, I don't know if they were the Calypso band that were on the beach when they were leaving on the boat. Perhaps they are. But anyway, just to get some into the summer mood. So I hope you avoid zombie islands, but enjoy a nice stiff cocktail in this summer heat, and we'll catch you next time on The Hysteria Continues. So say goodbye to the good people.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
no man.